As the world reckons with the effects of the global COVID-19 crisis, we need to restructure how we manage both individual and general wellness. Consumers are increasingly looking for wellness benefits in all aspects of their lives, becoming more health conscious and mindful. The world of tea mirrors these larger cultural shifts as we see tea trends tackle everything from sustainability to digital developments. To talk on innovations in tea, we have with us Dr. Gurmeet Singh. Dr. Gurmeet Singh is a professor and the head of the Center for Ayurveda Biology and Holistic Nutrition at the Trans-Disciplinary University, Bangalore. He is a scientist, inventor, and innovator with 25 years of experience in academia and a strong interest in developing sustainable food-first solutions for health and wellness issues. He has a B.Tech in chemical engineering from IIT Delhi and a PhD from Pennsylvania State University, USA, and has over 25 patents filed and 20 published publications. I welcome Dr. Gurmeet Singh to make his presentation on innovating tea, past, present, and future perspectives.
So thank you, Mr. Jayan. Thank you, Rebeloji. Thank you, Sanjeet, for calling me over. It was a good meeting we had at TDU a few months ago, which eventually led to me coming here. So happy to actually be with this audience. I do a number of things, but tea has been my passion for the last 25 years. And I've always been looking for an opportunity to come and share some ideas here, and so happy that I got this year. Cool. So my university is a small university, Trans-Disciplinary University, north of Bangalore, near Yelahanka. Largely focuses on, as the name suggests, transdisciplinary knowledge, which is looking at traditional knowledge systems and modern sciences and seeing how the two can work together as opposed to against each other. And by working together, we come to solutions to problems that mankind is facing, but we are unable to solve, right? I mean, health problems like diabetes, cardiovascular health, and livelihood problems, right, with farmers, sustainability issues, so all number of problems. RIST is a organization, Rural India Supporting Trust, which helps fund my program, and so I'm always grateful to them. That's what helped me leave a company like Unilever and come back to academics, because they supported me. And IOG is a little venture that I do, a tea club that I run. A lot of the thoughts developed through that. Yeah. So I'll talk about innovation. And so what is innovation? Yeah, introducing something new, new methods, new ideas, new products, making changes to what already exists, right? But why do we need to make change, and why this talk in this context? And I think this was mentioned so well by Joshiji in his talk just now, that if you look at the value chain of tea, right, we are in a trap. 50 years ago, we were probably sharing 50% of the value of tea and pretty much all agri-commodities with the growing regions. Yeah? And over the last 50 years, that has migrated to, I mean, it's less than 10% in most agri areas, where that's the value left in the growing region. Also India versus India, growing region versus the rest of the regions, there's no value left. And so how do we create value there? I mean, these are examples that I picked up from literature for cocoa, for coffee, for tea, right? 1% of profits in the growing regions, 53% with retailing giants and brands. So that's a massive shift that has happened. And I don't know if you realize, but 50 years ago, the talk was all about integrated supply chain, right? Which is, companies thought the way to wealth for companies would be by owning the supply chain. Today, it's not integrated supply chain. It is managed supply chain. They found that it's too difficult to own supply chains, and it is more profitable now that we've understood how they work. We can sit outside and manage them. Management is managing supply chains, basically squeezing supply chains, as we all know. And that's what is creating, I think, a lot of issues in the agri, no matter which agri we look at around the world and in India. So there are two forces if you look at. I look at there is forces of commoditization on anything that we have, anything we consume, and there are forces of personalization. Personalization, largely, if you can personalize things, you can probably up the value of that commodity. It is largely playing around price and convenience, right? So how do you move up? Our challenge is we can't go to the personalization, right? We want volumes to be high. But can we move up, slide up the value? Can we increase the value while still keeping volumes constant? We saw that there is a lot of competition in volumes as well, right? Most countries seem to be upping their volume game. And so the challenge more and more so is, there is going to be a lot of volume. We may internally decide that, hey, in India, let us limit production. But globally, there is going to be more and more volume that we'll compete against. So the challenge is not how do we control volume anymore, because you can't control the world. It is how do you up the value. And therefore, we need to go to the intangibles. A lot of them were mentioned in the last lecture as well. IP is one of them, right? That how do we own any IP? What is the uniqueness that we offer, right? What is the competitive, almost the unfair competitive advantage that we have, right, is what we are looking for. And the question to all of us is, do we own any IP now, right, in the tea industry? Where is our IP over the last 30, 40 years, 50 years that we've generated? So that's a question that we'll try and look at. But before we do that, let's look at, has anything happened in tea, right? Innovation happened in tea, because if you look at all the innovation gurus over the last 50 years, no matter what university you go to, one thing everybody agrees with, that if something doesn't innovate, it dies, right? Now, tea, if you look at the first cup of tea, there is a mythology around that, 2737 before Common Era, Emperor Shennung in the forest in Yunnan, or maybe he was a herbologist, he was a fakir, he was a rishi muni, going around looking for medicines as you would do, right? You would go to the jungles and look for medicines, and around 2737, he was sitting under the under a tree, middle of the jungle, on his annual visit to bring his herbs back to his practice in the city, and he was boiling some water, and some leaves fell in it. And rather than throwing that dirty water out, because usme gir gaya and let me start all over again, he took a sip of it. He must be a scientist. Scientists risk their lives for such stupid things. He took a sip, and he didn't die. Instead, he felt refreshed. And so he took a few leaves, a few seeds, brought it back to civilization, and that was the first cup of tea, and that was the start of tea, right? 5,000 years ago. From that journey, right, 5,000 years ago to today, about 3 billion people drink tea 3 times every day. That's massive. Right? From one cup to this, a 5,000-year journey, no doubt, but that's massive. And a lot must have happened, right, to do that. And what were those? Well, what I'll try to do is just look at a few of those interesting stories which appealed to me, caught my attention. I'm sure there are many more, but I'll just share those, and I think they contributed massively to the growth of tea. But what has tea been over this time, right? Tea has not been the same thing, right? It has changed. What it meant to us has changed, and that meaning itself has led to its growth, right? It started off as medicine, right? While Shennung felt refreshed, and that is why, guess what? That's why we drink tea even after 5,000 years. It's the same thing. We drink it for refreshment, right? But his main, after he brought it back, was he was a medicine man. This is a medicine for it detoxifies you, right? There were about 72 different poisons he said that this could cure. So it was a medicine, and almost for 3,000 years, it remained medicine, one of the most bitter things, right? It could not be had as a recreational thing. Around 780 or so, it started moving into the spiritual zone, right? Because these monasteries, right? The Buddhist monasteries started growing it. They found that it helped them stay awake during long hours of meditation. And so it became a spiritual thing. And whenever the emperor would come into the mandir or the monastery and would see what people are drinking, he said, hey, I want some of that also. And it started moving up from the spiritual world, it entered into the royal world. And then 1637 or so, when the Portuguese queen, right, Catherine, brought tea chest with her to UK, it became a thing of the royalty, the nobility, and a show-off almost, right? That I am drinking tea, so I am kind of superior. And it moved into the third phase, what is called as tea became a show-off, right? And then 1838, I say that's for some of you may remember, that's the year when the first few chests of tea went from Assam to the London auction. And that started making tea from a drink of the classes to a drink of the masses, right? Really, because the process from a kitchen operation, it started becoming a industrial operation from there on, right? And it took rapid leaps and bounds, and that's why I say it's the drink of the masses. In fact, I say that people consider 0 year, right, as the birth of Christ, right? And so we are 2022, and we now call it Common Era and before Common Era, CE. And I look at CE as year 1838 when the first tea shipment went from here, because I think that started what I call CE's caffeine era and before caffeine era. Because caffeine became the drink of the masses then, and the industrial civilization was kind of took off because of that, because industrial civilization requires one thing. It requires like 1,000 people living, sitting so peacefully in a room together for the whole day. That thing was not possible. 2 people in a room for 1 hour and they would start a brawl, right, before caffeine came in. Caffeine resulted in thousands of people sitting down and being productive for 8 hours at a stretch, which is what is required in modern society, dense societies. Is not possible. You take caffeine out, we'll go back to the old ages, right? We don't realize the importance. We many times think, I want to have decaffeinated, right? I mean, caffeine is today's civilization in some sense, right? So it is caffeine era and before caffeine era. And of course, now we start looking at as a lifestyle choice, because when many people start consuming it, you start, the scientists, there is enough funds available for scientists and other parts of society to start going deeper into that. And as you go deeper, you find a lot of benefits, or sometimes you find anti-benefits to that as well. But in the case of tea, we found only goodness. With more and more research, we keep finding more and more goodness associated. And now people are talking of it as a lifestyle drink as well. Yeah? Many operations, of course, many discoveries, many in the plantations, in the factories, right? And largely to do with artisanal processing as we started off, then industrial processing, and now we're talking about Industry 4.0, and there'll be a couple of talks also tomorrow probably or later today on some of the advancements there. I'll not go into this, just to show that, hey, one of the key features has been the size of the gardens, right? From a kitchen operation, we've been going up the scale to about 20 tons per day, right? Maybe 30, 40 tons per day. I had a chart when I was working in Unilever showing that actually it all depends on how long will it take me. 3 hours is kind of the window of getting leaf to a factory. If I can walk 3 hours, there's no other thing, then 3 hours is my walking distance to the factory. That's the size of my factory. And if I have a road, then I have a roadway 3 hours. Now we could probably make a plane 3 hours if we wanted to. Or if you could stabilize the leaf, you could have one factory for the whole of the world if you wanted to. And I had a presentation to that effect that I had shared once upon a time under my disruptive ideas. Right? But let's look at how tea has changed, right? And starting to enter into some of things we know, but maybe we've not looked at it from this perspective, right? These are 3 different formats of tea, right? We have on the left is a cake, right? A compressed block of tea, right? Which is where tea started, right? 3,000 years ago, that's how people were consuming tea. It was a block, right? And then we went on to a finely ground powder, which is called matcha, and then the whole leaf. But if you see, these are 3 different, from a physics point of view, these are 3 different physical structures or macro structures. They give very different infusion properties. They have very different chemistry in there. And they all come with progress in terms of what was the defining vessel when we had a chunk of tea, right? A block of tea. It was a cauldron. You would have a big patila sitting on a fire, and you would break off a lump and throw it in, and that's how tea was for the first 3,000 years, right? That you would bring something on a caravan or on a silk trade route. That's how tea would drink. And that was all because you would boil, you would create fire only at the end of the day, once a day, and you are throwing something on, boiling a lot of water, and that's how it was. And then you started to get to refined, so this was bitter, right? This is not a very pleasurable drink, right? It was a very bitter drink. When you started, it took almost 3,000 years to start debittering tea. Another way of looking tea is, what is the whole technology of debittering, the chemistry of debittering? As we managed to debitter tea, our volumes increased, right? So we went from a very bitter block to the matchas, which were sweeter teas, and we figured out how to make them sweet by only pluck fine, only pluck in this season when the fresh leaf. Even today, if you go to China, I went to the lake areas of China, they make green tea only in the spring, very early spring. Because when the fresh leaf comes, in the at the time when there is a lot of mist around, floating clouds coming in, sunlight is cut down, you have sweet leaf coming in, and you can take that and make good matcha out of that. And then that same matcha went to Japan. But after that, rest of the year, it's too bitter, they make oolong tea. They don't bother with the green because green becomes too. Same garden, that's how they split, right? So then came matcha tea, and with matcha, of course, it was a bowl, a soup bowl. This kind of thing started becoming very popular, very cheap, right? And you went to the bowl teas, right? And matcha became popular because you required a bowl to whip things in. And when you started becoming even more, the cups and saucers and kettles started becoming popular and low cost, the leaf tea emerged, right? So a lot of what we do also depends on how much of fire we can control, what is the kind of pottery or drinking vessels. One very simple example is, Turkey used to be 100 years ago was a coffee drinking. Hardly. We know why they switched to tea, right? Now today they are the largest tea consumers in the world. Per capita kgs of tea, they are number one. And how did a coffee drinking country switch to tea drinking country? I don't know how many know. Because of coffee was in a very expensive cup. Tea they made that nice, I don't know if you've seen the Turkish fluted glass, beautiful looking glass, 36, 24, 36 shape, beautiful shape, right? And that was low cost, at 1/10 the cost of a coffee cup. The whole country gave up drinking coffee and switched to tea. As simple as that, right? So you have to think out of the box when you want to increase tea, right? Sometimes the solutions are coming somewhere else. What do we need to do? What is blocking people for drinking more tea, right? Because as most scientists you will talk to, they will see if you're drinking 1 cup of tea, start drinking 2. If you're drinking 2, start drinking 3. If you're drinking 3, start drinking 4. No problems. If you're the more the number of cups, 6, 7, the healthier you will be. And started very early in life. Right? If you're starting at 50, 60, probably it will not create that much of a benefit. But if you're starting at 20 and have been consuming more than 3 cups for 20 years, your brain will be more active, your heart will be better, your gut will be better, right? So we would like people to drink more, but what is stopping them, we need to figure out, right? Because the consumers are living a very different lifestyle, and I'll give some ideas there as well. So these are, we saw these three, the Tang, the dynasty, the Sung dynasty, the Ming dynasty, right? These are the three, the blocks, the powders, the leaf tea started very late, right? About 15th century and so on. And all the nice oolongs, etc. developed only after that because we started understanding how do we improve the aroma, right? And aroma meant there was no sugar, right? At that time, sugar became very popular, low cost only in my life, right? I used to stand for 1 kg of sugar in a ration line 8 hours as a kid, right? That was my duty. Right, to every month, 1 day was sugar collection duty. So sugar has become common only very recently in most of our lives. So debittering was a very huge thing. We debittered by adding fruits to it as the French did, by adding lemon to it as the Americans did, by adding a little bit of milk as the Britishers did. We to start boiling it in milk or whatever and start adding a lot of other botanicals. The Kashmiri Kawa had a lot of spices that we added to it to debitter tea. Those are all examples of debittering so that I could taste and get the benefit of feeling refreshed and staying awake, right? Okay, some interesting stories here, right? When tea moved to Japan, right? And I said that one of the reasons for debittering was that in the early season you had nice clouds and mist in China where tea was growing, in the lake areas where tea is grown, Wushan mountains, etc. When it went to Japan, there was no mist, right? And so they could not get great tasting green tea there, right? So what did they figure out? Someone figured out, well, probably the clouds coming in during when winter changes to spring at that time could be simulated by covering, right, the leaves. And they started covering the leaves, right, before plucking in that time. And they found that tea became sweeter, right, at that time. So for matcha, sweetness is extremely important because if you're going to eat leaves, it's going to be extremely bitter. In fusion, at least you can control and say, I will dip it only for 30 seconds as opposed to 3 minutes and control bitterness. But for matcha, you're eating everything, right? So they started covering. That was a major innovation, which is what led to tea in Japan. The government also found out, and the kings, of course, because of the rich people were drinking tea, they said, we'll tax. Yeah? And tax collectors are also lazy people. How do you tax people? How much of tea somebody is producing? They say, hey, from a distance, I can find out how much of area is covered. So I'm going to tax based on area covered, right? I just go and say, itna area covered, so much of tax you pay. There's one guy who didn't want to pay tax, right? This guy, Mr. Nagatani, right? He said, I don't want to pay tax, so what do I do? How do I make sweet tea? His problem was, how do I make sweet tea without covering in Japan? He worked 15 years on it, right? And the reason I want to emphasize 15 years is there are no quick solutions, right? You have to work hard, but you have to define the problem very clearly, right? So he said, I'll make sweet tea without covering, and he figured out that he could do that if he created a steaming process. Yeah? But only challenge now was that the leaf was wet. He couldn't grind it so easily. It didn't grind so well. And so he tried to start selling the leaf teas, right, as such. And of course, there were no buyers of green tea at that time. But he did manage to find in a city which was Edo or Tokyo. Kyoto was the big city. It was a very conservative city. Edo, Tokyo was a more experimental city, the hippie city of Japan at that time. They were willing to try the hippies, try out. We may not find them we may not be comfortable around them, but they're open to new ideas, right? And so they were open to new ideas, that city. They took this in, and tea grew. Leaf tea today, that's become the norm in Japan as well, right, as everywhere else. Coming closer to India, right? This is how, when the Britishers started industrialization of tea, their industrialization, what they saw in China, and instead of 1 oven, we will have 30 woks. Right? And then scale up to 100 woks and 1,000 woks. And of course, woks, so people were taking tea leaves which were brought in by the pluckers and haath se lage hui hain, and all nerve endings have died, of course, by that, because that's your job for 50 years, just drying tea with your hand. Right? And there was this young guy called Davidson, one of my heroes, right? Irish guy, Northern Ireland, who by chance, his uncle was in tea business in Assam. He came here as a 17-year-old chap, got to manage a little tea plantation, but within the first 2-3 years, he decided, hey, we need to dry tea differently. And he had an engineering bent of mind. He was not an engineer. So he went back and designed the first tea dryer, or the first successful tea dryer, the Sirocco fan, as it's called, because it's a fan which requires to move a lot of hot air. Hot air is very light. It's not dense. And moving air has been a problem for donkey's years for us, right? I mean, again, low-cost fans is a very recent technology for us, efficiency, right? And when I grew up, desert cooler, only GE could make a desert cooler kind of a fan. There's no other company which could make a good desert cooler kind of a fan. But he, 100 years ago, figured out a fan, right, which he could to blow hot air, and created a tea dryer. But the reason is and so he captured about 85% of the tea market in India, right? Pretty much every company had tea fans made by him. But why I consider my hero is because 2011 to 14, I was in UK, part of my job, so I spent 3-4 years there. And I went to Belfast to the Titanic Museum. Everybody's seen Titanic. A lot of us have seen Titanic movie, so we wanted to go and relive that experience. So went to this museum. And there I found this plaque, this one, right? This is not working. But this plaque I saw, which said, Sirocco, right? And I said, hey, and they had this little story of that this guy, his factory was actually right next to the Titanic Museum, because the Titanic Museum was on the docks, and the Sirocco factory was next to it, right? And what I realized was that this guy, Davidson, one day, when he was putting up his factory and designing his dryers for tea and sending them all the way to India, he must have walked into the shipyard which was building the Titanic and the other big ships of that time, right? They were from small ships, suddenly big ships. Now, the big ships are big because they are actually inverted buildings, right? There is the lobby at the top. It's too cold. Nobody stays there except for the captain. Everybody is in a hotel which is an inverted 10-story hotel under the water, yeah, basically, right? Sealed. When you are sealed and you're on a journey for about 40 days from Southampton to New York, there's no fresh air. So he realized that this ship was going to be a luxury ship. They'll start off with 1,000 of the richest people from UK. And if they don't worry about ventilation, they will have 1,000 dead bodies by the time they reach New York, right? Of very rich people. He said, have you thought about ventilation? And they really hadn't thought too much about it. So he spoke, I know how to ventilate. And so he created the ventilation things for the big buildings at that time. So today, every big building in Bangalore is all glass and all covered, even though we have wonderful climate outside. But ventilation probably started from there. Moving air at lowest possible cost through ducts, right? He didn't stop there as well. So he took over all the shipping, also provided solutions there. He didn't stop there because another question he asked, how do you power these ships? He said, we power by steam. How do you generate steam in the middle of the ocean? We take coal. Where does the coal come from? It comes from quarries, right? So he went to the quarries and whales, etc. And what he found was it comes from quarries. It's not from mines. He said, you get only from the top. There's no coal under the ground. He said, no, there is, but who can go under? We can only go a few meters. If we dig deep mines, people will die. There's no good air below there, right? So what if I provide you ventilation? He said, then we'll go kilometers down and create. So he provided solutions there, and deep mining took place. Right? Today, I'm told, I know how many people die per day cleaning the gutters of India, the sewers of India, because of bad air. Davidson probably would have found a solution and delivered there, right? So I myself feel so guilty that I'm not a mechanical engineer, that simple solution that if you could blow before somebody enters and create a little bit of ventilation in there would save how many thousands of deaths. One report I saw 20,000 people die every year. I don't know, correct, the numbers vary like 10 order of magnitude because of all the politics involved with it. But it's so shameful that solutions exist and we have not been thinking of these simple problems. But my thing is, tea was providing solutions to so many different industries in the world, right? The inventions were happening in the tea industry. The innovation was happening here, and that solution was then moved. Because tea was one of the first big industries. I mean, if you look at, can you imagine engines working in the forests of Assam? It's a tea industry. It's the first factories were tea factories in India that came about, right? We were leading edge in terms of engineering in this space. Yeah? Again, another example, right? Another gentleman here, right? And this is how rolling was done, right, before machines came in, right? Same with wine as well, same in tea, right? And the thousands of, every factory used to have thousands of people. Haath se aisa kar rahe hain. When the hands are tired, you start walking on it. When feet are tired, you do this, 8, 10 hours, 12 hours job every day. This is what you're doing, right? Till these guys, the Jackson brothers came along and said, hey, this action, right, I can do by a paddle. They put a motor and they put a paddle, and that was the start of rolling machines. And then, of course, they designed the famous Britannia, set up the company, and the famous Britannia machines. I mean, we should talk a lot more about it when we talk about our teas and factories. That, I mean, we are still using Britannia machines in so many factories in India. It's fascinating to see that. Of course, the CTC machine is one of the big inventions as well, right? I know how many of you I know are not fans of CTC machines. Tea became commoditized as a result of that, but it contributed a lot, right? It doubled the cuppage of tea, right? From 200 about cups to about 500 cups per kilo of dry tea, right? And CTC Black became such a big success that tea was green 200 years ago. Now it's black CTC everywhere, right? So that has created a drink of the masses, right? And if we take pleasure in that and we are proud of that, that we could create something so that 3 billion people put it to their lips 3 times every day and swear by it, it's a massive achievement that we have done, right, over this time. And India also, from nobody drinking tea to almost everybody, has happened only in the last 50 years, largely because of this, right? One is because this CTC infuses well in milk, right? Milk takes the bitterness away, but I can get a lot of the caffeine out, right? And that gives me a lot of the energy, right? So I can have that mix. And we're used to that because of the world of Ayurveda. We're already boiling spices in milk, so we could do that. And look at this advertisement from the 1950s, Brook Bond Red Label, right? I don't know how many can read Hindi. Har packet mein badhiya chai ki zyada pyaliya. In every packet, more cups of great tea, right? 1950s. Because of CTC, when the CTC came, they shifted to CTC tea, one of the first companies to shift to CTC teas from orthodox because it was risk, right? Everybody would say this is inferior tea, right? So they had to somehow manage a campaign to get to this, and this is the campaign they started there, right? And so today from there, we have like a tea we think for, I mean, this is from a WhatsApp message, so it's no great shakes, right? That in India, almost for every occasion there is a tea, right? So that's the journey we've had. CTC tea also spawned 3 very interesting formats of tea which would not have been possible otherwise, right? One is the tea bag, right? That you require CTC, Fanning's grade, right? Neither too small nor too big in there. The iced tea, you needed to extract stuff, right? And be sure a lot of stuff came out, but didn't clog the filters that were required there before things got into the evaporators. So that happened. And then instant tea powders, of course, from there. And they have created multi-billion-dollar businesses in each of these and dominated, right? But now we've come to this point where we are saying, hey, tea stagnates, right? So, and so what has happened? Has it really stagnated? Yeah, because we keep hearing this. Tea is stagnating. Many people say it's actually, I quote here, I found this as a very sad statement when Alan Jope, who was CEO of a big company, 2020, and he made this statement, right? Pointing to falling sales of black tea from his company, he said fans are getting older and drinkers are starting to fall over. I mean, I thought somebody who owns the largest tea brand of the world, right? What kind of a message are you sending? Mine, you want to exit the business, it doesn't suit your profitability margins. What kind of a message are you sending to the whole industry from which you've made billions of dollars over the last 50 years, right? This is not the way to sign off, right? I feel very, very sad with this statement when Stalwart comes out. And then I started looking, but has it really stagnated? And what I found out, in the 10 years where Lipton grew zero, from 1.2 billion, it stayed pretty much 1.2 billion in that decade, yeah? Which is what probably led them to sell this. There was a brand, Herbalife Nutrition, very different kind of a business, went from 0 to 1.2 billion, selling tea. Right? They package it very differently, right? They also benefited from the whole chart, the revolution, the Chinese revolution on tea, the volumes going up. Where did they get all their tea from, right? From China. Oolong tea, green tea, black tea, they say it's the best mix of all three. Yeah, but largely it is around 0 calorie energy, right? That's 1.2 billion, right? Selling tea, right? Very different business model, so it's not the same volumes, yeah? Maybe 1/10 the volumes. But people are buying tea, right? Value-wise, it is still offering. So it's not stagnated. Another 5-hour energy, this doesn't use tea, it uses caffeine. But it says, and it pitches to a very niche market. There's another 1 billion business in the US started by an Indian. Yeah, he thinks he's the richest Indian in there, started from scratch, right? About my age probably, right? He went there jobless, was on the highway, and he went to a trucking halt on the highway. You stop there where truckers come, and he found truckers were paying $3-4 and they were having double shots, 500 ml of coffee. He asked why. He says, because this keeps me awake for 4 hours, right? He realized there's a great value. People will but he found out that while they were having coffee and kept them awake for 4 hours, it still required them to stop every 2 hours because having drunk half a liter, you need to take a loo break, not a sleep break, but a loo break. So he defined his problem that I need to create something which will keep you awake, but yeah, people who want to stay awake don't necessarily want to go and pee all the time, right? Was his giant insight that he got. And therefore, what he did, 500 ml of coffee, he converted into a 60 ml shot, the Yakult kind of a shot, the 5-hour energy drink, right? 1 billion in 10 years, just that. Technology existed, everything, and a lot of sales. And put it at the truckers' halts everywhere, just a niche market, didn't go after. But of course, from there went to students, went to people in the financial districts. Everybody wants to stay awake all the time. So you went on and on. So those were innovations. So I don't think tea has stagnated. I keep getting asked the question, has it stagnated? I think there are an immense number of opportunities, right? So let's look at some of the opportunities. Yeah, so caffeine, as I said, I'm very fond of caffeine. Caffeine is probably the only molecule on planet Earth today which seems to have a benefit on 4 dimensions of brain. Cognition, memory, focus, mood, right? No other molecule which can do that and is harmless, right? People say you get addicted to coffee. It's not an addiction ki aaj mujhe 1 cup chahiye, then next year I need 2 cups. By the time I'm like 60, I need 100 cups to drink. It's not like that, right? I mean, I'm started with 3 cups, I'm still at 3 cups, I'm fine, right? So it's not that kind of an addiction of coffee. And that along with 2 other wonder molecules, right? A number of other, that's theanine, right? That we call. An amino acid which is only there in tea, right? It's designed to sell and pick up on its virtues, which they say it gives you the calming property. And this with this, and then the aroma of tea together is what makes tea so powerful. This combination doesn't exist in any other plant in the world, right? So is there something to leverage there, right? So, and there's lot many other, it's zero energy, brain, I mean, tea for gut, right? We had a patent 20 years ago, 15 years ago around tea and gut. And today people are beginning to talk about gut. I think the next 10, 20 years will be the age of the gut, right? That if our gut is healthy, we are healthy. And guess what reaches the gut? Not very many things reach the gut because they get absorbed early. So what do we need for gut health? Fiber, you have all heard, right? The other thing is polyphenols, right? Polyphenols are complex, so fiber was easy, so people spoke about it. Now attention is shifting to polyphenols. And as it shifts, will tea be there or not? We need to make sure tea is there, because tea is the richest source of polyphenols amongst all plants, right? 30%, 40% of soluble solids are polyphenols. No other plant has that kind of an intensity of polyphenols. It's up there with pomegranate, amla, etc., right? So let's see what are the opportunities that tea has missed, right? So, you know, we have designed tea, our process, the shape, etc., for hot water. The one technology which became very popular over the last 300 years is that we can now get hot water anytime. I have gas, I switch on, within 2 minutes I have hot water. In the rest of the world, electricity, I turn on the plug, I have hot water anytime, right? So hot water is what we have excelled in, right? There is hot water available. Let me design a tea which will come out, infuse in hot water. That's what we've done. Right? But last 50 years, there have been many more innovations which we've ignored. The innovation of ice. Ice has become commonplace. Right? Every house has ice. Have we designed a tea? Have we understood that, hey, ice is becoming commonplace, so cold water, chilled water, iced water is becoming commonplace, and therefore, what is the physics and what is the chemistry that I need to do? What's the macro structure? What's the chemistry? How things will infuse? What will I do in my factories to make iced water teas, right? Things which will infuse in ice water, right? We ignored that. Right? We ignored that ice water has this microbial challenge, right? Microbiology challenge that hot tea doesn't have, right? It kills any microbes which will be there, right? Any green plant material factories will have microbes. So how do we decontaminate? How do we make sure that there is no surface microbiology there which could be harmful? Those are real scientific challenges that other parts of industries are tackling. We have ignored that. We focused on hot water and we've excelled there, right? But the cold water revolution, Coke decided I'll do that, right? So there are other areas. Another revolution which happened about 30 years ago was the carbonation revolution, right? 30, 40 years when I went to the US around that time. You get a barrel, you get a CO2 cylinder, and you get tap, right? Tea on tap, beer on tap. Carbonation entered. Beer industry took off, to massive levels with carbonation, right? Actually, the success of beer industry has been carbonation and creating that beer on tap. We did not take advantage of that. We let that go by, kuch aur hai, right? Hamara to hot water infusion hai. Packaged water happened, right? People in China, the habit was before, everywhere that water people would not drink, they would drink tea. Very dilute made, but whole day they would drink tea, take a bottle of tea and drink. Packaged water happened. It was ideal for us to move forward. We did not solve the problem of stability. Flavor change. Even over a period of, if you take a hot cup of tea, you leave it outside for 10 minutes, it creams, right? Yeah. I don't want that in a bottle happening. We have not solved that chemistry problem for that. Otherwise, that market was ours for the taking. Everybody in bottled water would have been, mineral water nahi hota, tea mineral water. Right? So those are things that we need to attack from a scientific perspective. There's another example, right, that we have, which is, this is evolving, right? There are about 1 million cafes in the world, maybe more than that. Tea doesn't exist there, right? What has led, we say coffee is gaining, coffee is gaining, coffee is gaining. What has coffee done to gain that cafe space and tea has not, right? They have looked at the roasting chemistry. They have looked at the grinding, the microstructure. Always they have a certain grind size that will go with the coffee machine. They have created a coffee machine with 12 bar pressure because that's how it will infuse and give you a good cup of espresso, very high pressure. Normal water se nahi aata, right? They've put that all into a nice looking, beautiful machine because it'll be out there, right? Everybody will see. Has to be clean in a cafe. Cafe cannot have the mess of a chutney and a boy making tea. Somebody comes, it takes me like 10 minutes to make the tea, and then where do I dump all this stuff? And it messes up the place, right? We have given up this space. Today I talked to cafe guys, they're saying, do you have a tea? I have 85 water at 85 degrees coming out of the tap for me, right? If you can give me a masala cup, a tea which will infuse in 85 degrees water and no mess, because I have this French press, a nice glass press, French press. When I pour it should infuse at French press and at 85 degrees centigrade, and when I pour it into a cup, there should be no spent leaves coming into the cup. This is my problem statement. If you can solve, I'm not worried about the price. Anybody who walks in will pay 200 rupees for a cup, right? I can easily pay you 40, 50, 60 rupees for your 2 grams of tea, right? If you solve that problem for me, right? We have not been able. So that's a problem I would like to work on, right? If anybody is interested on that. Those are simple cases we need to go after, and then there will be markets which will get created. We need to understand the use cases, right? Of course, the instant coffee business is 100 billion. Nescafe is 20 billion, right? We've not entered there. I created a project. Actually, I lived 3 years in Assam in Raidang factory, in Dumduma, creating a whole pilot plant to make tea as good as my target was. I had gone out and said, I can make an instant tea which is better tasting than Taj, right? So we did that. We set up a pilot plant. Unfortunately, our company sold off the plantations by the time I ended the project, and I was sent to UK after that. But we can do that if there is focus, right? And of course, the various extraction methods, right, which I take inspiration from Ayurveda, which talks about swaras, kalka, kwat, heem, fant, arak, shirpak, asava, which is basically extraction in cold pressed juices, matcha, decoction, cold brew, hot brew, distillates, boiled milk, alcohol. These are the modern interpretations of those. The benefits change. Same material can get extracted different way, but the benefit changes in each one. And Ayurveda is all about health benefits, so there is an association with biology there that we've not really tapped into. But as I said, direct extracts, cold brews, alcohol wash, they do exist, but we haven't solved the chemistry problem of flavor, of haze, of stability, which need to be solved to make them opportunities which go beyond a small geography like, say, US, right? Or somewhere else where people worked on coming closer to the plantation, and probably some processes like the cold press process we created to create tea juice, and said, why can't people consume tea juice? 5 minutes, done. Then aroma capture process, right, where we said, hey, my first visit to a factory, when I joined the tea industry, it was by accident. They wanted my wife, then I came around as excess baggage because we were in Delhi. They had to offer me a job, otherwise my wife would not have moved. And they didn't know what to do with me. I was designing bioreactors. They said, closest bio we have is the tea garden, so you work on tea, right? I had never drunk a cup of tea in my life, right? That was 1998. So my first visit to the factory to see what could be done, I found that there's a smell, a nice aroma which comes near the factory. And it's not there in the teacup, right? Or at least it's like getting lost, right? So I said, I did a calculation how much. So I took a sample, I did a mass balance with GCMS, and I realized 70–80% of the aroma is lost. So I said, why not capture it, right? So I captured it and spent a year capturing it because nobody was paying too much of attention to me. So I could do all these esoteric activities. And when I took that aroma and I added back to tea, people said, wow, right? If you can give us to this at an economical way, if it is scaled up manner, then we will take it. So I spent the next 4 or 5 years making this process and then scaled it up and put it in Kenya. We have gardens in Kenya. And so this is the first time ever that anybody had captured essential oil from green leaf from a dryer exhaust. So I was not extracting. All aroma was aroma extracts which destroyed your fiber or tea. This is actually capturing from what was getting lost. Right? And then, of course, environmental withering that you could control wither rather than leave it in the open. What if you start changing in controlled environments, different oxygen levels, and tea does very fancy things in terms of aroma, in terms of infusion chemistry, etc. right, which happens. Coming to that aroma story, this is, I found it a few years ago. This is a very famous perfume company, right? Japanese famous company, Issey Miyake. And they sent two of their, like a perfumer and a color designer to Japan, right, to this island. And they spent days on that island, morning, evening, just walking around and smelling nature, right? And those smells they captured into their perfumes. I walk around the tea gardens and I get a different sense in the morning, in the afternoon, in the PM. If we are capturing aromas from these three different, could we create varieties? So there are opportunities of ending up into super premium, right, areas. And then you could create perfumes, and maybe then the Darjeeling lingerie can actually be scented with the right perfumes also, and take it to the next level, right? And then make sense, right? And then, of course, my favorite is the kombucha. Maybe every tea planter here could attempt a little bit of a kombucha as well, and maybe who knows that it is tea plus wine kind of a territory that you get to. And this, I think, will become a drink of the future, because this place not only has polyphenols but has fermentation. That's the ideal combination for gut health, as I said, right? And that's another story, right, to look at. Tea beyond tea, just two more slides. Tea beyond tea. I worked 3 years on a project on looking at opportunities for tea for categories such as toothpaste, skin, shampoos, etc. It's a growing market, actually. So that's something to look at as well and not ignore, because that could easily take up a huge amount of tea if needed. Right. And then, of course, garden, right? You already have gardens, right? You have some space which could be co-planting, could be done. And why not take the two great heritages of India, 3 great heritages? Like I look at spices as part of Ayurveda as well, right? If you marry the two, the tea plantation and the world of Ayurveda and spices together, spices, fruits, vegetables together, and create this supply chain. Because the one challenge that the Ayurveda industry faces, I don't know how many of you are familiar, is the quality, right? Authenticity. One has to do with authenticity. Is this what it is claiming to be? Is this ashwagandha really ashwagandha? Yeah. Second is that it's not contaminated, right? Tea has a great history of value addition, right? You can take the same 2 leaf and a bud, and you have processed to make it into 100 rupee kg tea as well as a 1 lakh rupee kg tea as well, right? So, and there's so many different ways. That has not been done for pretty much any other plant in India. So could we do some of those activities? One of the main hurdles for exporting a lot of the botanicals from India is the surface microbiological load, right? And if tea could solve that as a process, right? They have dryers and things, they could solve that, right? That would suddenly put the Indian botanicals on the world map, right? And then, of course, you can create very interesting blends with tea as well. So there is an inherent botanical mix as well, which is possible. So there are a lot of problems to unlock if you start. But if we just enter into, say, co-planting, hum bhi banayenge, so then ashwagandha today is being sold for so much, will be sold for half the price, right? The world will be very happy. So don't enter unless you have a premium positioning, solving a problem for which you can charge a premium, right? That is what I would say. And there are things which are, this is the way you would address. Well, we in our just one pitch, what do we do in our university? Well, we have a lot of botanical research, databases, herbariums. We have 400 plants growing in our gardens. We do authentication, chemical fingerprinting. We have biology labs. We have the latest analysis, HPLC, GCMS, FTIR. We have a tea pilot plant, which I know Indy is not here. He helped us set up specialty tea pilot plant. We can also do CTC and orthodox, tea and ISA, mini equipment we took from Mr. Bagaria. And you can do various analysis, kombucha fermentation we do, instant tea we have facility, and we have a state-of-the-art culinary experience lab where we do tea tastings, etc. So we have some infrastructure to do research on tea, whether it's the garden end to look at co-plantation, which our university has a lot of experience on, 30 years of experience, and more recently on tea in the last 2-3 years. And of course, what needs to be done, I think 2 things that we need to do for the future, my 2 messages. One is focus on IP. I think if you want to up the value, we need to look at IP. So, and IP requires R&D investment. So how do we do that? IP is one. R&D pe investment kariye. Second is tea at 2.0. We need to get educated on tea. There's a lot happening on tea. Just like in the culinary world, the explosion is all around molecular gastronomy, right? Chefs are today scientists, right? My nephew goes to Harvard, and he got a scholarship to go. He's studying for law, but he took a culinary course and was given a 6-month stay at a Michelin star restaurant in Europe. So he went there, and he says that is the most high-tech lab that I have seen, right? A science lab that I've seen. So chefs are working in labs today and upping the game. We also need to, every one of us in this room and beyond the 100 people who work with, all of us need to up our understanding of tea, I feel. So education, science, education, physics, chemistry, bio of tea is extremely important. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gurmeet. I think all along we've known that the retailers love to commoditize the plantation commodities. And what the tea plantation industry is screaming for is innovation. So from premiumizing our teas with more varieties, to infusing teas, to extracting its polyphenols, I think the industry needs to step up and probably take this to the next level. I'm happy to say that UPASI is also in talks with TDU to collaborate in these areas. So if some of the tea companies would step up and, speak, meet with Gurmeet, we could facilitate this. We are also looking at, growing botanicals in our plantations if we can amend the Land Reforms Act. That is a state subject, of course, so we need to work with our state governments on that. So, Dr. Gurmeet, as a token of appreciation from UPASI, I'd like to hand over this gift to you.